welcome to the Dave Cast for Saturday, July 25th. Back in 2009, this woman in the photo, Jenny Dietrich, who is a Louisiana resident, was celebrating her 91st birthday by enjoying a nice lunch of Southern fried chicken at Longstreet Cafe over in Gainesville, Georgia, when the police chief, Frank Hooper, came in and told Dietrich to carefully put down her fork and knife and listen up, because she was under arrest. And then the police chief went on to tell her that it's against city ordinance to eat a fried chicken, a culinary delicacy sacred to this municipality, with anything other than your hands. Now, this was all a practical joke that her friends were playing on her, but there really has been a law on the books in Gainesville, Georgia since 1961 that makes it illegal to eat fried chicken with anything other than your fingers. Did you know that? And the truth is, when you start looking in the background, that this 1961 ordinance was put on the city books as sort of a public relations stunt to promote Gainesville as the poultry capital of the world. They're very proud of that. But it does remind me that there are a lot of crazy laws on the books all over the place. And I had some fun Googling and reading about them from all over the world. But there's just so many. Let's just stick to our own state of Georgia, because we have a lot of crazy laws right here in Georgia. For example, over in Ackworth, Georgia, it is required that every resident own a rake. In Columbus, Georgia, it is illegal for stores to sell cornflakes on Sunday. In Marietta, it's illegal to spit in a public building, which, to be honest, it's a law I could get behind. In Jonesboro, it is against the law to say, "oh boy." And I'll tell you some more about that one at the very end of the video cast today. In Athens, Clarke County, they've got a couple of crazy laws over there. Goldfish may not be given away to entice someone to enter a game of bingo, which just sounds so oddly specific to me. Also in Athens, it is illegal for one to make a disturbing sound at a fair, which begs the question, what constitutes a disturbing sound? Quitman, Georgia sounds like a sweet little town in South Georgia, right on the Florida line. But if you own any chickens in Quitman, Georgia, it is illegal to let them cross the road. Apparently, they're not so curious about that riddle, why did the chicken cross the road, down in the good town of Quitman. But also in that town, it is against the law to change the clothes on a mannequin in a store window without pulling the shade down. I mean, really? Apparently the fine folks in Quitman are really very modest. So anyway, I'm telling you all this to kind of set up where we find ourselves now in the study of the book of Exodus. Because today we are on part 18 of a series I've been doing on the book of Exodus. And we have just finished chapter 20 back on Thursday. So it took 18 episodes to get through 20 chapters. But now be forewarned, we are entering a different part of our study. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use today's episode to sort of lay some foundational stuff for how we're going to navigate from here to the end of the book. Because as we enter this second half of the book of Exodus, the source material is a little different from what we've been doing so far anyway. In fact, let me say this. I love studying the Bible. I do. And if you were to start all the way back to the very beginning with the book of Genesis and then just start reading straight through the Bible, you would find in the book of Genesis 50 chapters of action-packed narrative. And there are some genealogies in Genesis that make some people bored, but they're actually kind of fascinating to me. And then after those 50 chapters in Genesis, you turn the page to Exodus, and then the story really takes off. And at that point, it is just blazing narrative. I mean, it's just all so exciting. And that's where we've pretty much been for these 18 episodes, as we've gone through Moses' birth and call and confrontation with Pharaoh and all the plagues and the escape through the Red Sea, and then we're out into the wilderness by chapter 16, and then you have the crisis of water and food. It's just thrilling stuff. I mean, I find it thrilling, but others do too. They do. It's the kind of stories that they make movies out of. And then after all of that, we get to the foot of Mount Sinai, and God appears in a theophany of cloud and smoke. And then we get to the Ten Commandments, which we just spent 3 episodes. And then the narrative just grinds to a halt. And we enter the second half of Exodus. There's 20 more chapters. And suddenly you're reading what feels like an ancient law code, because that's pretty much what it is. I mean, right after the Ten Commandments, there's 42 more laws, and they are very specific. And then there's very specific and detailed blueprints for the tabernacle, which is not part of the law per se, but it is written in the form of commands. You know, like, you shall make the ark as a box, this many cubits, this length, do just as I command you. And so even though it's a blueprint, it's kind of stated in terms of legal requirement. And then you have some truly fascinating, thrilling stuff about how to make the curtains and the table of showbread. And after that, there is a very little brief short narrative of Moses actually doing all those things. And then they finished the tabernacle, and Moses can't go in. For crying out loud. I mean, God shows up, comes to live in the tabernacle, and Moses can't go in. And so now we got to solve that problem. And how that problem is solved is by a block of 9 chapters of ritual laws. And it is like a priestly tech manual of how to do the different types of sacrifices. It's all about sacrificial rituals, and then appointing the priesthood. And then the priests are appointed. And everything's great for a minute, but then the priests, they blow it big time, because they take upon themselves their father responsibility to offer incense in the tabernacle. And that doesn't go so well for them, which might be an understatement, because they die. They all die. And so then there are dead corpses in the holy place, which, as it turns out, is one of the main ways that things become ritually impure, which has been covered maybe in previous chapters somewhere. I think I might have zoned out. But so naturally, what follows after that are 6 more long chapters about ritual impurity and purity, and to how to make things pure after they've been made impure. Then there is this whole block of laws about Israel as a whole, not just priests, but how Israel can have moral ritual purity. And then there are laws about Israel being in the camps and the organization of their camps. And believe it or not, we even get to a section where there are laws about trumpets. And then finally, that's when they begin to leave Mount Sinai. And so, to be totally blunt, as exciting as the first half of the book of Exodus is, and it really is, the second half is kind of the opposite. The second half of Exodus is where people's New Year's resolution that this is the year they're going to read straight through the Bible, it often gets stalled out right here and dies, because it is tough reading. And so, my dear friends, if we are going to make it through this, we've got to change our approach for these chapters a little. Because how you make sense of these laws, a lot of it is how they fit, how these tedious laws fit into the larger narrative context, and where they fit in the plot of the overall storyline of the Old Testament, and ultimately, the whole Bible. And I know I'm being a little sarcastic, and I do apologize, because I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I guess what I really am saying is that we're going to now switch to a more theological approach to the study of Exodus, and we're going to mostly be exploring the why. The why. Why are these laws here? Why were they important? And what can they teach us? And most importantly, how do they fit into the overall redemptive story of the Bible? As I was doing research on those crazy laws that I told you about at the beginning of the episode, I found it interesting what the reasoning had been for why these kind of esoteric laws got put on the books in the first place. I mean, it's pretty clear, I think, that only eating chicken with your hands, that law in Gainesville, was just a tongue-in-cheek publicity stunt. But But where I could find the backstory on some of the others, it was really quite enlightening. And that brings me back to the law I told you about in Jonesboro. Remember the one in Jonesboro where it is against the law to say, oh boy. And so that sounds crazy, right? But not so much when you hear the reason why it was placed into law. Because it wasn't using oh boy like we would say, oh boy, I can't wait till this weekend because my family's going to have a birthday party and there's going to be cake and ice cream and clowns and ponies and games. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. That's not how they were using oh boy. No, it was oh boy, in the derogatory use of the word boy in reference to African Americans. And it goes back to the time right after the Civil War when many of the former slaves were homeless and they had no income. And sadly, they had little or no food. And to make matters worse, they were living in this region where there was great animosity, prejudice, and resentment against them. Persecution against them. And it turns out that many former slaves that were living in Jonesboro, they were there working for whatever money they could earn, but then there was almost no work for them to do because there was a bad economic downturn. But sometimes when the richer gentlemen came to town, they would want their horses cleaned. And so they would call out to the slaves to come and clean their horses by saying, oh boy, oh boy. And then the former slaves, many who were gathered there hoping for some work, some of whom hadn't eaten in days, they would fight over who got to clean the horse that would earn them enough money to eat for the night. Well, you see, the fights were all part of the entertainment for the white gentlemen, if I can use that word, who had gathered around. And so as a result of these fights, many of these former slaves were killed and others were seriously injured. And finally, just because of all this, the city of Jonesboro passed a law saying that these wealthy people could no longer come to town and call these former slaves by saying, oh boy. And so as Paul Harvey used to say, now you know the rest of the story. But the point is, when you know the background, the law kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And so it is with a lot of these Old Testament laws. And while we aren't going to cover every single law, and mostly we're just going to look at the categories, I think what we will find is that there is more to them than we might realize. There are things going on that aren't obvious at first glance. And so that's what we will start doing next Tuesday on the Davecast. In the meantime, have an awesome Saturday. Join us for online worship tomorrow at 11. I'm going to be preaching on Romans 8, which are some verses I think we all need to hear right now. And so keep bringing the hope. Whatever you do this weekend, be safe, and bye-bye for now. God bless.